I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce you Dr. Soli, who not only hosted very successfully this conference, but also is pushing for all kind of innovations and initiatives, not only as we supposed to deal with Iran, but also in Africa and Asia and so on. So thanks a lot for your activity. Dr. Soli Shahvar is the head of the Esri Center of the University of Haifa, had his BA and MA for Tel Aviv University cum laude, PhD in School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and he deals mainly in topics that deal with Iran and Shiism, and the floor is yours, please.
Thanks a lot, Haim. There is this Iranian popular, I would say, literary image of a figure called Mullah Nasreddin. In Turkey or in the Ottoman Empire, he was named Hoja. And there is this story that when he comes to deliver a speech before an audience, he asks the audience, "Do you know what I'm going to talk about?" So nobody raises the hand, so he says, "Okay, if nobody has a clue about what I'm going to say, then I won't say anything," and he goes. The next day he comes to deliver a talk, and he asks the same question, and everybody raises the hand. He says, "Then if you all know what I'm going to talk about, there's no point in talking about it." So he comes the next day, people don't know what to do, so some people raise their hand, some people come down. So he says, "Okay, those who know, tell those who don't know." And there is probably a fourth possibility because the audience has escaped here. So anyway, we will do our duty.
With a lot of beauty.
It is a little bit quite a longer lecture, but I will try to go as where I can actually speed up things. Well, Iranian presence in Africa has historical roots. It started even in pre-Islamic period. I'm not going through all points. There were mainly traders that came to the east coast of Africa, and not in a continuing wave, but from time to time. There was mainly because Iran was on the silk trade and on the spice route. So many Iranian traders sought new markets. So they moved branches of their activity, children or some people who are in the companies or themselves to other parts, among them also Eastern Africa. And that's why, for example, we know that, for example, they started in Bandar Qasim, which is in the tip of Horn of Africa. There are issues of hypotheses or ideas about the name Mogadishu, which is, thank you, there are some people who say that it is a Maq'ad Shah, the place of the king, and this is in Persian, or in the Persian terminology, it means that either a place that the Shah or representative of the Shah is sitting. So there are a lot of things that connect to Iran. In Kismayu, which is southern Somalia, there is this, some people keep still the Charshambe Suri, which is a pre-Islamic kind of a festival which precedes the Nowruz, which is the new Iranian year. And the word Zanzibar is coming from Persian. What can I say more? There is also the Shiraz party in Zanzibar, or Shiraz is the southern, most important southern city in Iran, which is historically a town of traders. So this could be all a kind of Iranian presence in Eastern Africa. I'm jumping a little bit further. There is also African settlements in Iran. For example, the Zar, which is kind of a African version of the Dibuk, is very much practiced in the southern coast of Iran and the Persian Gulf coast of Iran, where the people are mostly dark-skinned, and of course some of them come from the slave trade that came from Africa up to the mid-1840s. I jump quite a lot, go to Pahlavi period. In the Pahlavi period, we have, the relations didn't come to very much. I mean, apart from maybe two states. One was Ethiopia, which was part of this periphery doctrine that the Shah with Israel and Turkey, or with the non-Arab people and countries, developed with Ben Gurion on the Israeli side, which under Haile Selassie were part of this doctrine as well. The other one being Egypt, which is more to do with the post-Nasserist period. I mean, Sadat, that's the time that the Iranian and Egyptian relations actually got more solidified. Well, there was diplomatic dimensions in the Pahlavi activity in Africa that was it was expressed by recognizing the independence of new states in Africa, establishing the diplomatic relations with them, developing economic and cultural relations. We have about 7 countries in the north and east of Africa up to 1970, and a total of 31 countries up to 1976, which is the heyday of the Pahlavi regime. Mutual visits of heads of state or high official, and some investments, mainly in the oil, petrochemical, steel, and other industries in which Iran had both knowledge and experience. And also Iranian assistance during disaster periods in Africa, such as heavy hunger or drought. There was personal dimension to the Pahlavi activity in Iran, which was based mainly on the relations or personal relations of the Shah with number of leaders in Africa. For example, King Farouk, to his sister, the Shah was married for his first marriage. Anwar al-Sadat, as I said, developed a very close relations after, actually mainly after 1973 war, or during actually. Haile Selassie, I already mentioned, Hassan II, King of Morocco, and also other kind of figures, African figures like Abdou Diouf, Prime Minister of Senegal, which has close relations with Amir Abbas Hodeida, the longest serving Prime Minister in Iran, or Habib Bourguiba, which was in good relations with Ardeshir Zaidi, who was the son-in-law of the Shah, and is the foreign minister for a time. Here we can see Prince Fawzia of Egypt becoming Queen of Iran in the wedding. Here Haile Selassie with the Shah during his visit in the early 1970s. There is also the strategic dimension of the Pahlavi activity in Africa. The relations were part of the Shah's anti-Nasserite, anti-communist and pro-Western policy on the background of the Cold War. So this actually was expressed in a number of alliances, like the Periphery Alliance, as I mentioned before, the Baghdad Pact, and the CENTO, which is Central Treaty Organization. Supporting anti-communist regimes in Africa, such as deploying troops in 1975 to Somalia against the new communist regime in Ethiopia. The Ethiopians are not here, so but the problem no, it's support to Egypt after the expulsion of the Soviet from Egypt and the October 1973 war. And the Shah put a special stress on developing relations with Islamic countries in Africa, mainly in the North and Horn of Africa. In this respect, the Islamic Republic continuing this trend and actually extending it further. Egypt under Sadat is a good example for how far the Shah was willing to go in that respect in anti-communist activities. For example, he permitted use of Iranian airspace to Soviet planes carrying weapons and military equipment to Egypt during this 1973 war. Medical assistant of the Red Lion and Sun organization. Assistant in money in rebuilding, for example, Port Said after that war in 1973. Established a joint bank with initial investment, establishing of joint shipping companies, a company providing a $200 million credit line for Egypt, and also carrying out a number of technical industrial projects with Iranian money. And there is also the nuclear dimension of the Pahlavi activity in Africa. As you well know, the nuclear program in Iran started very thinly in the 1950s, but late 1950s, but started very strenuously and very seriously in 1974, when the money from the oil came in large numbers into the Iranian treasury. And here the main activity was in trying to expand and to diversify the Iranian the locations or the sources of uranium from Africa. And in this respect, the Shah actually invested in mines, uranium mines, like the Rosing uranium mine in Namibia, and cooperation with, for example, South Africa, especially in enrichment, for which he paid in oil, and also in other investments into the South African oil industry. Oh, this is Hebrew. Yeah. So, in summary, the activities of the Pahlavi regime in Africa were quite shallow in interest in Africa, compared, of course, to the later period. The total agreement between Pahlavi, Iran, and Africa during the entire 54 years of the Pahlavi regime was 60. I just remind that the only, I would say, connection between the first Pahlavi king, Reza Shah, who was deposed in 1941, with Africa is that he was expelled or exiled in South Africa, and where he stayed for 3 years until he passed away. So no activity was at that time. Pahlavi activity in Africa also, we can say in general, as I said before, mainly concentrated in Egypt and to some part in Ethiopia. Now, since the establishment of the Islamic Republic, which is the main issue here, this presentation, we can say that most of the people who are actually running the Iranian regime since 1979 were in some parts of the older generation, like Khamenei, Rafsanjani, were part of opposition, Islamic Shi'i opposition groups in Iran against the Shah. So the relations between them with other Islamic movements, not necessarily Shi'i, and especially with the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, were quite, there were some relations. I wouldn't say that they were, during the whole period, they were continuously, but there were some relations. For example, the very radical Shi'i Islamic group called Fadayan Islam, which was operating during 1945 to 1955-56, and was considered a terrorist organization, carried a number of assassinations in Iran, actually had links with the Ikhwan, and the founder of it, Nawab Safavi, or the leader, actually in 1954 visited Egypt on the invitation of Sayyid Qutb. And also the main publication, or the main, the Bible, if you can say, of of Fadayan Islam was very much based on the books or the main Bible of the Ikhwan. And in 1948, for example, they tried to arrange, and they did arrange actually, with another Shia Islamic group called Mujahideen Islam, or Sazman Musalmanan Mujahid as they was called, 5,000 volunteers from Iran to the Arab-Israeli war, independence war, what we call it, or what they call the Nakba, the other side. But they were prevented to move to Israel, Palestine, because the Shah at that time didn't permit this. So there has been some contacts before, but after of course, these at least in a certain period, or the recent period of the Islamic Republic, went much higher and became much extensive. Here I would like to mention two articles in the Iranian constitution that refer and explain the type of activity of the Islamic Republic in Africa. Chapter 10 of the constitution is dealing with foreign policy, and Article 152 says that Iran rejection of all forms of domination, rejects all forms of domination. Defense, it rises up to the defense of the rights of all Muslims, non-alignment with respect to the hegemonist superpowers. So that's one article. Article 154, the Islamic Republic of Iran, that's what IRI means, support the just struggle of the mustaz'ifun, the oppressed, against the mustakbirun, the oppressors in every corner of the globe. So it means not necessarily Muslims. So in a way that that very much reminds the Marxist ideology of proletariat against the bourgeoisie, the Iranian regime has actually adopted this and put it in a different direction. These principles actually determine the following character of Iranian foreign policy. Its non-aligned character, na sharqi na gharbi, neither east nor west. It's populist, Islamist, and anti-monarchist. Jumhuriya Islami, Jumhuri, Republican, Islami, Islamic. And Republican means that the people actually, the dimension is on the people ruling. Doesn't necessarily have to be in practice in Iran. At the name at least it says so. It's support of the oppressed people of the world, wishing to release them from their oppression. Where was that? Yes, from the oppression, domestically and externally. It means that overthrow the domestic anti-Islamic rulers and also oppose the external anti-Islamic influences or forces. And the preference as we can say, preference in the Shia is given to fight or the activity among Muslims, mainly non-Shia Muslims, rather than the infidels. So that's why the Iranians are more active in the Islamic world, because their main idea is to try to Shiaize, yes, the Sunnis into the right faith, which is Shia. Of course, they have failed in that, but they have. We can at least give them that they have perseverance. Now, periodization of the Iranian activity in Africa. How we can actually tackle this? Under Khomeini, not much happens. Why? Because first, the Iranian regime is mainly concerned with consolidating its regime within Iran, which has undergone 54 years of secular, modernizing regime, monarchist, and of course the Iran-Iraq war, which we can say the only connection maybe was that the Gaddafi Libya supported the Iranian side rather than the Iraqi side. Then under Rafsanjani, 1989-1997, we start the establishment of strategic relations with the new Sudanese regime, which Haim knows very well. Investment in Sudanese infrastructure, and especially in Port Sudan, support of Islamic opposition organization, especially in North Africa. such as the group Islamic Army in Tunisia. Under Khatami and the first term of Ahmadinejad, which is 1997-2009, where there is some upgrading of Iranian activity in Africa. Expression of it is about 300 contracts and agreements with a number of African countries, but most of these agreements didn't actually came into practice. There was a session in 2008 by the foreign ministry, Iranian foreign ministry, and there a person called Bagheri, former head of the Africa desk in Iranian foreign ministry, actually specified why these things didn't actually materialize. He said lack of sufficient understanding of the African scene, its problems, culture, and complexities. We can say lack of sufficient scholars on Africa, slowness of practical decision-making vis-à-vis Africa, and lack of support by the regime to the private sector for encouraging them to invest in Africa. These are examples of some of the contracts that actually were signed, and part of them actually were materialize in Africa. On the second term of Ahmadinejad, I remind you, the second term of Ahmadinejad starts with this green movement in Iran, the very extensive popular demonstration in Iran, and the crushing them by the regime. And also the escalation of the, I would say, relation with the West on the nuclear issue. Here we have the stepping up of the Iranian activity and influence in Africa through much more presidential visits to Africa at the top list of foreign policy. Wow, we just started. He is willing to give me some creation of cadres and of local African experts, long-term planning in relations to Africa, and familiarizing the Iranian private sector to the sources of markets of Africa, and encouraging them to invest by the providing benefits. Organization of Iran-Africa conferences, extending the Iranian welfare activity among African populations, mainly in Islamic countries, such as the extending the activities of the clinics of the Iranian Red Crescent, which actually replaced the Red Lion and Sun of the Pahlavi period, which is very welcome by the local population. Using student and tulab, religious students from Shi'ite communities in Africa who study in Iran as ambassadors of goodwill and agents of influence, if you want, fifth columnists on the return to Africa, disseminating Iranian Shi'ite literature and symbols, political, religious, and cultural, among African Muslims. And most of the above measures were actually come under the soft power policy of Iran, which Iranians use more and more in their relations. Here we can see photos of Ahmadinejad's visit in Zimbabwe in April 2010. Here's another one. Here is the conference that the Iran-Africa conference, for example, when Motaki was still foreign minister. Here is another from the same conference. For example, the periodicals dealing with Africa, which is published in Persian and in Iran. That's Mutalaat Africa, African Studies, and Pajoueshnameh Africa, which is more or less research on Africa. The Afran Institute, Africa and Iran Institute, which is also quite active. Establishing clinics in Africa. Since we don't have time, I won't show this short clip. And agricultural projects that were done also in Africa by Iran. Iran-Africa Council for Economic Cooperation. So different venues and very extensive. So we can say that in the second term of Ahmadinejad, the importance of Africa became known, were stressed more seriously, because it is the second largest continent in the world. It has important natural resources, mainly such as desired by the Islamic Republic, namely uranium and metals. It has a population of nearly 1 billion people, half of which are Muslims, and as such, a potential target for Iranian Shia influence and da'wah. The growth of Islam in Africa is the highest in the world, which was mentioned before. Maybe we could call it Islamic continent, maybe. Not that I suggested, yes, but the way Iranians see it. Africa has 54 countries, all of which are members of the United Nations. 28 of the 57 member countries of the OIC are from Africa, most of which are members of non-aligned movements. 3 out of 10 member countries of the UN Security Council are from Africa. Africa is geopolitically positioned. It controls important waterways, such as the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and the Bab el-Mandab Straits, which are very important for Iran. What could such a characteristic provide Iran? Again, some things move here from Hebrew. Well, on the ideological level, presenting the Islamic Revolution as a model for liberation from the control and influence of colonialism, imperialism, and racism, even in their modern version, and Iran as an ally which would assist African countries in such a liberation. On the economic level, Africa provides a huge consumption market seeking to develop, thus becoming a target for Iranian goods, knowledge, and technology. Apart from economic profits, this would concurrently help to create a positive image of Iran as a country which helps to develop Africa in diminishing poverty and unemployment rates by creating employment for locals. On the cultural level, using its diplomatic missions in Africa for cultural religious activity, mainly among young Muslims. This includes the following: sending regime propagandists and religious seminary lecturers for instructions on Islam, and especially to al-Barshia, financing studies of Tulab from Africa in religious seminaries in Iran, and even establishing Madaras Ilmiye, religious seminaries. On the strategic level, this strengthens the superpower image of which Iran wants to reflect, not only active in her region, in the whole region, but worldwide in distant regions such as Africa and South America. Strengthening the IRI's uncompromising and steadfast image in the struggle against Israel, the Zionist entity, not only in the Middle East, but also in Africa, aiming to oust Israel from there as well. Consolidating a naval and ground forces presence in the Horn of Africa in order to increase its bargaining chips in the time of crisis and growing international pressure, such as on nuclear issues, by threatening important shipping routes apart from those from the Hormuz, which I mentioned before. Creation of a major and central bridgehead in northern Sudan for Iranian activity in Africa, mainly as a basis for training and equipping terrorist opposition organizations in Africa as elsewhere. Creating alternative supply routes for equipping pro-Iranian terror opposition organizations in the Middle East. Supporting local Shia communities, such as those in Senegal and Nigeria, aiming to operate them as fifth columnists. Intensive activity in the backyard of Egypt. I'm talking about a Mubarak period, which after a short period of, what's his name, that was deposed? Mursi. Now we are talking about Sisi. I mean, they are more involved internally, but of course Iranian maximizing sources for uranium and uranium enrichment necessary for its nuclear program. I will skip that. If you leave me another few minutes, I will talk about...
How much is few?
Few?
2 minutes.
How much in your...
Take 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. So I just want a few words about the Arab Spring, which is, I would say, the last phase of Iranian involvement not in Africa, at least in North Africa, but you know, we are talking about Iranian involvement. So North Africa should be also treated. The Iranians try to, as I say, hijack the Arab Spring by giving it Islamic, describing as the Islamic revival. And of course, the success of the Islamic movements in, for example, Tunisia and in Egypt gave Iran the ability to present it as such. Here we see different things. Here, for example, this is not a caricature from Iran, but from the Arab Spring people that actually puts all these leaders of the Arabs. But you can see also Iran there in the third from that side. And the inclusion of Iran as a part of the Arab Spring was distasteful to the Iranian regime. Instead, we can see the popular protests in Iran in 2009, which actually to many it was what actually it was a catalyst for what happened in the Arab streets. So instead they tried to give it a Islamic posture and connected it with copying from or modeling on the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And more and more we can see, this is the pictures from the Islamic Revolution of 1979, which also wasn't Islamic actually, but the result was Islamic, but the opposition to the Shah, it was a coalition. So statements by Iranian leaders were more and more describing this not only as Islamic, but also modeled as after Iranian example and after the Islamic Iranian example, and with the parentheses, Shi'i Islamic Iranian parentheses. This wasn't, and we can see here a number of, here for example, Ayatollah Muhammad Reza Mahdavi Kani, head of the Assembly of Experts, the Arab Spring uprising are a movement inspired by the steps of the late Ayatollah Khomeini. Or creating the first international conference on Islamic revival in Iran in September 2011, to which many were actually invited from the Sunni world. We can hear some photos from this conference, and flooding the Arab street with a lot of caricatures that were originated from Iran and describing all those Arab leaders, of course selective, no Syria inside, because Syria is an ally of Iran, describing these as anti-Zionist, as we can see, or anti-American. Here is the knife, Bidariya Islami, Islamic revival, awakening against those countries. And also statements by security people, for example, Qasem Soleimani, head of the Quds Force. What has he said? As a result of Islamic revival in the region, the geostrategic reality in the Middle East is changing in a historic and unrecognizable way against the interests of Washington and in favor of Tehran. Today, number of Iranian countries are being born in the region, and thus, for example, Egypt is a second Iran, in spite of the American opposition. These kind of statements, and I have few, and I can't say it now because of the short of the time, they enraged not only the leaders of those Arab Spring countries, but even the opposition, the people because they didn't identify with the Iranians or with the Iranian regime. And the result of this was actually expressed and narrowed down, or was developed, we can say, into a Sunni Shi'i, or what we call Sushi war, which has an ethnic dimension to it in Iran and the Arabs, which is a historical, of course, clash. And this actually dropped the whole policy of Iran to use the Arab and hack the Arab Spring and use it for its own purposes. And just in conclusion, this actually, in my analysis, brought Khamenei and the leadership of Iran to the conclusion that having problems inside Iran, the popular movement of 2009, which further developed, and having been under pressure from outside, international pressure on the nuclear issue, and now a regional pressure from the Arab Muslim countries, Sunni countries, against Iran, this necessitated a new policy. And what I'm saying is, in my view, that this new policy was what brought the coming of Rouhani and the election of Rouhani, that if you will ask me, I will have the opportunity to explain, because I don't have time now. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Shahvar. Before I introduce the next speaker, let me thank personally on behalf of all of us to Amit that have organized all the administration, made a wonderful job, worked very hard, and we know how to appreciate it. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Dr. Moshe Terdiman, also a member of Esri Center and RIMA. We mentioned RIMA in the morning. Moshe is pushing and carrying the whole organizing of this very nice day. He worked very hard on that, and I really know how to appreciate it. Moshe is a Middle Eastern studies scholar who he published a lot in various areas and issues on Islam in Africa and the Caribbean basin, Islamic social issues, Islamic environment issues, so the Arab and Muslim world, and so on and so forth. Really a lot of things. His PhD is in Maritime Civilization, University of Haifa, concern on maritime policy in the Mamluks in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Dr. Terdiman will talk about the radical Islamic activity in Africa, local roots and Arab influence.
Thank you very much. I would like first, it's very late in the evening, and I would like, in order to make it more interesting for you, to coin a new term. People are used to speak about the Shi'ite crescent in the Middle East. And Soli, אפשר אולי מפה של אפריקה?
יש פה, אני אעשה לך.
But I would like to term a coin... אפריקה? כן, מפה של אפריקה.
עזוב, אני אשים לך. עזוב, תן לי.
So I would like to term another coin, to coin another term, which is the radical Islamic crescent in Africa, which I don't know if you are aware of, but wherever you start it, whether in Nigeria or in Tanzania and Somalia, it is still a crescent wherever you look at it. So, for example, when there will be a map, I will just can show you, and according also, yes. So if we start in Tanzania, for example, in Tanzania, there is the Islamic, radical Islamic group called Uamsho in Swahili, which is very operative these days and also through the last decade. Now, the activities is changing from organization to organization, meaning that also it means who is your target audience? Who do you want to kill? Who do you want to hurt? So, for example, in Zanzibar, where Uamsho is active, the main people are mostly Christians. So they are burning churches, they are killing Christians, priests, beheadings, all those kinds of stuff is happening there. Now, if we go north, to the north, in Kenya and Somalia, we are having Al-Shabaab. They really don't care who is the target audience, as well as they can implement the Sharia wherever they are. So, for example, in Kenya, we just had 2 months ago the terrorist attack in Nairobi. Now, in Somalia itself, there are always suicide bombings against the TFG, Transitional Federal Government, which is now the National Federal Government, but it doesn't matter because it's the same. And then we move on from Somalia, and in Somalia it's also against Sufis, because It's Al-Shabaab against Al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, which Tim also touched earlier today. Now, if we go westward, we are going to the Sahel countries, in which we have Ansar ad-Din, and we have also the Islamic organization, the Islamic Al-Qaeda organization in the Maghreb. And they are doing other things. They are kidnapping people, mostly foreign citizens. They are also against Sufis. They are also against the regimes, the Muslim regimes. And then we are coming to Nigeria, where there is the Boko Haram, which is also targeting Muslims, also Christians. It really doesn't care who it targets, as long as they base their sort of ideology in the northeast part of Nigeria, which is based in Maiduguri mostly, and that part of the place. Now, if you look at it, you can see that it is a crescent. It goes from Tanzania in a crescent to Nigeria, meaning that that's why I coined this term of the radical Islamic African crescent, which no one uses, but from the material, I can see that it is true. Now, another country in which radical Islam is active is South Africa. Also there is radical Islamic activity. Now, what happens in other states in Africa? Well, radical Islam is penetrating in other ways, but we have now, on Monday, we just had an example of a new way of dealing with radical Islam, or even the possibility of it penetrating the country, which is just to ban Islam at all from the country. And this is the case of Angola, where, at least according to some news material, they banned Islam completely. They are just destroying minarets now, at least according to the news, and this is another way of dealing with the problem. But this is not the rule. This is just something exceptional to Angola. But it has effects, because now the Muslims in other places are wondering what will happen next to them in Africa, meaning in South Africa, in Namibia, in Botswana, in Swaziland, in places where radical Islam is, or Islam in large, is not the majority. Now, so we have different target audiences, we have different organizations. By the way, in South Africa it is Qibla, it is Pagad, and also there is Al-Qaeda activity in South Africa. So now, now there are three dimensions by which we can see why it is spreading in Africa nowadays. And the question asked afterwards, in which I will summarize at the end, is, does it has a chance to spread even more, or who will win the war, essentially, which is happening between Sufis and radical Muslims in Africa? So first, I will just go over the reasons. First of all, there are structural reasons in Africa, meaning porous borders, especially in the Sahel countries, which is the Sahara Desert is going over there. So the borders are porous, and that's why, for example, Boko Haram can train people in Niger, or can just spill over to Cameroon, or because we had last week the kidnapping of the French priest in Cameroon by Boko Haram, who was released in the meantime. And then also there is Chad, and all the area Boko Haram is active. Now, Boko Haram We don't necessarily know for sure, but it is possible that it has links with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and Ansar ad-Din, which are active in Mali. In Mali, in Niger, in Libya, in Algeria, all those places which are also bordering Nigeria, if you look at the map. So now we have a real, influence, mutual influence between those two places. Now, in Africa, the Muslims were in many places marginalized because they were a minority in some places in West Africa and in most of East Africa. They were marginalized. And that means that there is a discrimination against them and all sorts of other stuff. And then what the Muslims want a way out of all this situation. So they sometimes turn to radical Islam or to those organizations who give them a sense of identity with a more global cause, which is not only local. Because in the local area, they are just discriminated against. Now, in terms of ideology, I really will skip it because Tim just touched all of it. Sufis, Salafis, all this kind of struggle, so I just skip it. But what I would say, one word about it is that many radical Islamic groups today, just like Boko Haram, just like Al-Shabaab, are going after those Sufis, Sufi jihads, and also emulating some of the methods of activity. For example, Boko Haram, what are they doing? They are just like Uthman dan Fodio did. They are making hijra, immigration, and they are immigrating to a place where they can establish their community. And then they are just establishing the community and to implement the Sharia in that place. Now, that's exactly what Uthman dan Fodio did, and they are just following him, following his example. Al-Shabaab now, for example, are finding refuge in a place which was a bastion of Islamic radicalism from the 19th century. So I'm not sure it will be eradicated, or even the Kenyan operation, in my prediction, will not eradicate it because it has some sources. Now we are getting to the third category of Arab influence through charities and, for example, dawah stuff, charity, especially coming from the Gulf countries. And what they are doing is, first of all, they send the students to study in Saudi Arabia and in places like this, where the students get the Wahhabist ideology. They come back to their villages and then they teach the Wahhabist ideology to their fellow villagers. The other stuff that they are doing is they're coming and they are telling the people in the grassroots level, we will build you wells, boreholes, whatever you want, just become Wahhabists like us. And of course, you need to spread the word to the others. So you see many communities in the grassroots level are just converting to Islam and to the Wahhabist kind of Islam. And it happens all over Africa, from Madagascar, all over. Even in places where Islam is not prevalent. And their basis, by the way, for example, the African Muslim Agency, its basis is in Luanda, in Angola, the capital of Angola, from all places. So I'm talking really on an all-African spread. Now, I will just summarize and say that there is a war now between radical Islam, Salafists, Salafi jihadists, whatever you want to call it, between radical Islam, Wahhabists, all those kinds, all those waves, and between Sufism. It's what I turned to term as the struggle between Islam in Africa and African Islam. Because African Islam is all those Sufism, is all those Africans who have the merge of Islamic Sufism and traditional agenda. And then there is Islam in Africa, which is coming from the Arab world, mostly from the GCC countries, the Arabian Peninsula. And this is a war to life and death for all those Sufis. Now, I have to say that the Salafist radical Muslims are just a minority among the Muslims in Africa. But we should take them very seriously because of all the inherent problems in Africa and in African countries. And in order really to curb this, you need really to take care of the structural problems in Africa. And this is I think, the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for the speakers. If you still have the energy, I urge you to bring your question, notes, or anything else. Thank you very much for all of you. Oh, I'm sorry.
About Iran and Africa, I've got two questions. One is historical, one is modern. About the historical, you probably know that in '64, the Afro-Shirazi Party toppled the Omani Sultanate and joined Tanzania. Now, about the Shirazis, there are different theories. Because the question, who are the Shirazis?
Yeah.
So there are some scholars mentioning that already in the 10th century in Kilwa, the Shirazis.
Yeah, I have here the Kilwa Chronicle, but I didn't have time to show it.
Tanzania now.
That's right.
The Shirazis were the rulers there.
That's right.
And they were Shias. But by the time the Shirazis turned into Sunnis and became Sunnis, and those Afro-Shirazi party was a Sunni party. So
Yeah, I didn't.
What do we know about about the source of the Shirazis that are Afro-Shirazi party?
What I know is
This is the history.
yes.
Question.
What I know is that the origin is from Iran, from its traders that actually came from the Shiraz. And that's, one of the ways that we put surnames is according to the place that you come. For example, I don't know, there is by profession, and also by, for example, you say somebody, his name is Yerushalmi, so he's coming from Jerusalem. So Shiraz is somebody who is coming from Shiraz, and this was the habit up to, I would say, to Reza Shah period, which actually asked people to put their modern surnames to their own. So those who are named Shirazis are actually people who came from Shiraz. So we can assume quite confidently that they were Iranian Shiites. Now, throughout the years, maybe some other influences came about because of the Shiites being minority in Islamic countries. Maybe they outwardly at least changed their posture and adopted, there is taqiyya in Shia. So this is a possibility, but I think it's very strong evidence that they were Iranians, Shiite Iranians who came from, and I think this was the time of the Buwayhis, so there was also Shiite.
Yeah, now about more modern
Period,
activities of Iran. In Nairobi, where I served,
Yes.
there was a very big Iranian embassy there. And in fact, they always emphasize main aim is to unite Sunni and Shia and fight the infidels. This is even in their publications that the issue even in Swahili to spread all over East Africa. They emphasize that. That's to say, I felt that the main aim is not religion. The main aim is political, to recruit the sympathy of Africa to the cause against the West and against the United States and Israel. This is the main thing, but not religion, political aims. What do you think about it?
I think it's a taqiyya as well, because it is everywhere you look when there is writings in Farsi, for the Persian community. The main idea is to Shiites or bring a situation that the Shias are, if not the majority, at least powerful, influential, controlling, leading the Islamic world. Of course, as a Shiite country, they won't come and say, okay, we want to come and convert you to Shiism. Of course, they are very tricky, as we can see. They have tricked even the West into negotiations and into agreement. And this is part of the Iranian, I would say, I relate this to the Iranian culture of commerce, of the bazaar culture. You know, they are very good traders, good commercial activists, and they know how to sell you the product. So, and the religion, the Shia religion, or the Shia faith, provides them the means to do, even to lie, and this is okay if you are serving the maslahat, the interests of the Shia community. So, of course, they would come and say, okay, let's unite together against it. And World War II, capitalist countries collided with, or cooperated with the communists against the Nazis, because they were the common enemies. So, but what happened afterwards? So, this is, I don't believe this posture. So I think their true aim is to lead and control and to do Shi'ization as much as possible. And of course they won't come and abruptly say, okay, we want to convert you. But this is their aim. This is what they're doing by spreading these messages and sending these instructors. And it's a process. They have a very sabr. The sabr is a strong tool of the Islamis in general, and mainly about the Shiites. The perseverance, or the sabr, what do you call it? Perseverance, or the patience.
Thanks for all of you for coming, for attending, and happy Hanukkah.
Thanks for those who staying.
Yeah, and that you succeed to bear us so long, and see you in the next
conference on Africa.
Convention that we have on Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.